Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle. And in this video, we're taking a look at GoCollect's hottest trending comics for the week of November 12th. Now, for those who don't know, GoCollect puts out weekly articles that switch between hottest comics and trending comics. This week, we got Trending Comics, which is a more curated list written by Matt Tuck of books that are really starting to get liquid out there in the market. But before I get into the list, if you guys could drop me a like or a comment or subscribe if you're enjoying the content, helps for the channel, doing those things, I appreciate it. But let us get into this video here today. Of course, I'll put a link in the description. Like I already said, it is written by Matt Tuck. So if you want to read what he has to say, you can do that, but I will give you my breakdown as well. And coming in at the number 5 spot is one of my personal favorite Bronze Age books, the first appearance of one of my personal favorite Bronze Age villains. Well, this book right here is Daredevil number 131, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 82nd spot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book that came out in 1976, written by Marv Wolfman, that would feature the first appearance of the Daredevil villain arch nemesis known as Bullseye. Now, if you're a Daredevil fan, you definitely know who Bullseye is, probably his second most iconic villain in terms of his rogue gallery of villains. I think number 1 is obviously Stiltman. No, I'm just kidding. Of course, number 1 is Kingpin, and then I would say Bullseye is a close, second after that. And this is just one of the all-time great sort of Bronze Age books that really has started to get hot because of the fact that, we know that we're getting more Charlie Cox Daredevil into the MCU. We know that we're going to get the Born Again series later on, I believe next year. And one of the kind of, famous sort of rumor mill leakers out there did actually come out and claim that Bullseye will in fact be a part of the Daredevil Born Again series. Now, I think that that's something that could have been expected. Obviously, with the Netflix show, kind of where they left it off, they did actually have Bullseye in it, although not quite in his, Bullseye iconic uniform and everything, but they were implying that they were going to do kind of more storylines with Bullseye in the future. And, I think with this kind of current rumor that has come out once again, that's one of the reasons why you're seeing the book kind of pop back up on the list this week, kind of where prices are right now. It might be a good time to buy this thing. And speaking of those prices, as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. 9.8s have 96 on the census. Fair market value suggests 5,500. There hasn't been a sale in the last 30 days. 90-day moving is 57.60. So I have a feeling that if a 9.8 came on sale today, you probably would see it go for a lot less than the previous sale. Here in September, we had it go for 5,700. But I suspect that, if we're looking at kind of the Silver Age index and how books kind of correct, based on what the projections are, I would assume that this book has a little bit of room to drop back off. But we'll see if the excitement with Daredevil can kind of keep this book elevated, then eventually, the trend line will kind of collide into where the current values are right now. But this is, as you can see, is a book that really kind of had a slower shoot up than that of many other books in 2021. A lot of the books in 2021 that really blew up started to blow up kind of in the April and May time. You can see that this is a book that actually really only peaked around June/July here at the kind of $6,000 range, and then it kind of had a little bit of a pullback, and then it had another big sale, here in 2022, and now kind of where it sits is still at that $5,700 range. So I have a suspicion that this book could correct, although at the 9.8 grade, being that there's only 96 of these, we're talking about the top 3%. I mean, it's hard to say how many times, a book like the 9.8 one will go on sale, maybe a couple times a year, and if there are people who just want it, they want what they want, and that book might be able to stay at the 5K range. And then down here at the bottom, this is one of those books where you might be able to see it slabbed at the low grade from time to time, but generally speaking, you won't see it less than, say, a 5.0 or something like that. So now if you're looking to kind of find a low grade raw copy for yourself, typically I see them being sold around that $200 to $250 price point. All right, let's go on now to the 4th hottest trending comic of the week. And the 4th hottest trending comic of the week is a very cool one to talk about. This one right here is Amazing Spider-Man number 121, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 73rd slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book that came out in 1973, written by John Romita and Gil Kane. It would feature the death of Gwen Stacy. Now, I've always found this book very interesting due to the fact that it is a death book, and probably one of the most significant death books out there in the market. I mean, typically, one of the things about, death books being kind of these key issues that hold value is that they usually don't hold value simply due to the fact that no character ever truly dies in comic books. They usually bring them back in some way, shape, or form. If I'm thinking about, even the death of Elektra, definitely a great key, an excellent read, but, it's not like Elektra actually stayed dead. They eventually would bring her back. But Gwen Stacy is one of the characters that I feel like, even though they've kind of sort of leaped around things by bringing her back in, Spider-Gwen and all that sort of stuff. For the most part, when we think about the Gwen Stacy that relates to Peter Parker Spider-Man in the 616 universe, she has, for the most part, remained dead. And I think that that's one of the reasons why people view this book as a significant book to have in their Spider-Man collection, because it is such a impactful moment for the Peter Parker character. Now, as to why this book is getting, hot this week, really hard to say. I mean, I think that there's probably a multitude of touch points. It could just be that prices are correcting and people are thinking, hey, now's a good time to buy ASM 121 again. It could be due to the fact that, we've had the Andrew Garfield version of Spider-Man return in Spider-Man No Way Home, and there's been talks that they might do more with Andrew Garfield in the future, and maybe they're going to even bring in Emma Stone in some kind of way and do some kind of, relationship film once again with that Spider-Man and Gwen Stacy, and that would be really interesting, and maybe there's kind of some speculation going on with this book right here for that reason. But either way, this book is on the list this week, and it is an all-time classic Spider-Man book, one that everybody likes to have in their collection, especially those Spider-Man collectors. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. 9.8s have 77 on the census. Fair market value is 5,750. 90-day moving is 5,500. So very interesting to think about that. Obviously this is a book that is 3 years older than the Bullseye one, but it sells at the same price of the 9.8 grade, even though it is not a first appearance. That kind of just goes to show you guys, the power of the ASM title and the values that these books typically do command. 9.4s have 381 on the census. Fair market value is 1,200. 30-day moving 1,250. Definitely a book like many others that has had a little bit of a pullback, a little bit of a correction, but kind of falling right back into the trend line, so to speak. And as you can see, this is definitely a book that, kind of has a tumultuous up and down. There's always going to be price fluctuations for this book, depending on what is happening in the culture. And then down here at the bottom, not going to see it always slabbed at the low grade, maybe 3.0s around that $160 price point. And I would say that that's pretty accurate overall, because when you go into eBay looking for raw copies, typically they sell around that $200 price point at the low end, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. All right, let's move on now to the third hottest trending comic of the week. And the third hottest trending comic of the week is one that we should have suspected would have shown up on this hot list based on what has happened recently in the market. But of course, we're talking about Hello Darkness, my old friend, West Coast Avengers number 45, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 31st slot, the 31 slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book written by John Byrne that came out in 1989 and would feature the first appearance of White Vision. Now, what can you really say about this book other than the fact that I feel like this book is now infamous in kicking off what would be known as the 2021 comic book boom? I feel like it all started with WandaVision, and specifically the week that we had the reveal of White Vision. That was when the tide really turned in the market and everything just started to blow up. I mean, I feel like, there's probably moments that were actually before White Vision, but, if we're going to write kind of a narrative around, what book really kicked it off, I feel like this book is as good as any to kind of say that, it has the distinction of being the really crazy book that kicked off the craze in the comic book market. I believe, at the time when that happened, we had 9.8 selling at that $1,500 range, which was absolutely insane when you consider the prices for, Avengers 57, the first appearance of, the original Vision. I think $1,500 would get you like a 9.0 or a 9.2 or something like that. So definitely crazy that this book has blown up in the market, all the way back then, and is coming back now into, sort of the trending books out there. And the reason for that is because of the fact that we recently had it announced that Vision is going to be getting a Disney Plus show. And I think at this point, it's very, very clear, unless the character dies on screen, we will likely see them again. And even in that case, I mean, I still think that the Mandarin is going to come back at some point in time. So, I feel like no character is really ever truly dead, but let's keep it back to Vision here. Of course, this book popped off due to the fact that, we had that announcement. And what I thought was really interesting about this book is that really we saw quite a lot of raw sales, and we saw a lot of 9.6 sales, not too many 9.8 sales. And I think that that's really interesting that this book is, all the way on the 31st slot, meaning, there's quite a few sales for graded comic books of this particular book, but it's really a lot of the collectors getting those 9.4s and those 9.6s because I think either they're thinking they can crack and resubmit it and try to get that 9.8, or they're thinking, hey, this is a book that I just want in the collection and I don't want to pay 9.8 prices, but buying a 9.6 for $130, not too bad overall. But as we dig into the numbers, let's kind of really break them down here. 9.8s have 229 in the census. Fair market value is 450. 30-day moving is 450 as well. But this is definitely a book that has not sold nearly as much at the 9.8 level that the other grades have sold. You can see here in November, we had 3 sales at the 9.8 grade, which is, obviously more than what we usually see for this particular book in these last couple months. But generally speaking, 3 is not that many overall. But you can see this is definitely a book that, was at the $250 level in 2020 before we had the boom. This shot up all the way to $1,500. And then, of course, had a massive fall off once you start to get people, submitting their West Coast Avengers book to CGC. I mean, I don't remember what it was at the time, but I have to imagine that the census for this thing was probably 600, 700, or whatever the case is. And now we're sitting at 2,000. There was probably a ton of submissions for this book in 2021. And that really has a lot to do with why this book has corrected so hard, is due to the increase of supply. I mean, it's still a cool book. It's still something that is, definitely a key that would be cool to have in your collection, but, it was never going to be able to sustain that $1,500 price point. And then if we look at the 9.6s here, we can see, 503 on the census, fair market value 120, 30-day moving is 132. And then, of course, being a 1989 book, you're not going to see it slabbed at the low grade. But now when you go into eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically they sell around that $25 to $40 level. All right, let's go on now to the second hottest trending comic of the week. And the second hottest trending comic of the week is another Hello Darkness, my old friend. But this book right here is Moon Knight #1, up 10 spots, now in the 8th slot, which, although is pretty high up there, is definitely a fall from grace, as it was a book that for a long time was the #1 book sitting in the #1 slot. But what book am I talking about here? What is the significance of this? Of course, this is the book that came out in 1980, written by Doug Moench, that would feature the first ongoing solo series for Moon Knight. It would be the origin of Moon Knight. It would be the first appearance of Khonshu and Bushman. Of course, I'm talking about Moon Knight #1. Now, I'm sure at this point you guys know this book really well. I mean, we've talked about it on Hot List many times, especially, earlier this year when Moon Knight was going on. This was definitely one of the hottest books out there in the market. I mean, it is still one of the hottest books out there in the market. I mean, when you have a census as big as you do for this particular key book, you're definitely going to see sales out there in the market quite often. And this is one of those books that, continually sells. But, based on where prices are now, I think one of the reasons why it might be sort of trending back up is due to the fact that people are just looking at those prices and thinking, hey, this is a book that, kind of looks good on a shelf. I do want one in my collection. And based on where the prices are now, how they've corrected back down to normal, this just seems like as good a time as any to buy. And there's also been a lot of talks recently about, Oscar Isaac. He's kind of laid the hints that he's going to be returning to the Moon Knight character. They're going to be getting a season 2. And I think a lot of the Moon Knight keys have actually, in a lot of ways overcorrected. I think this is a book that, you can make an argument has probably overcorrected out there in the market. Additionally, I think Werewolf by Night 32 is probably a book that you can make an argument has overcorrected. And I think a lot of collectors are thinking to themselves, hey, Moon Knight, maybe it wasn't the best show ever, but he's still a pretty cool character overall. This is still a cool book to have, a great cover, Bill Sienkiewicz, and one that I think is worth picking up at these particular prices. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. 9.8s have 1,106 on the census, quite a lot. You can see that this is a book, 10,000 universal grades. That's pretty high overall. Fair market value is $400. 30-day moving is right in line to that, $400. And that, I think, is a fair price kind of to, pay for this book at the 9.8 grade. You can see that this is something that, really, really shot up like everything in 2021 and had that big, roller coaster lift and then the huge roller coaster drop back down to normal. Back in 2020, this was kind of a $300 book. So I feel like if you're buying this book kind of at $312 today, which was the last sale on Heritage, you're getting this book at a pretty decent deal overall. Definitely drops off quite a bit once we get to the 9.6s that have 2,200 on the census. Fair market value is $280, although 30-day moving is $138. This is one of those books kind of like the X-Men 266, where there's actually a lot of situations, depending on the grade of the book, where you would actually have an easier time selling this book raw than you would be able to sell, say, like a 9.4 or a 9.2 of it. And then of course, down at the bottom, you're not going to see it slabbed the low grade, but when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, I mean, typically now I see them being listed around that $40 to $50 price point, which is a pretty big fall from grace. All right, let's move on now to the hottest trending comic of the week. And the hottest trending comic of the week is a big one. This is one that I think has been showing up quite a lot on the hot list. Very interesting one to talk about. This is Hulk #1, up 77 spots, now sitting in the 13th slot, the 13th most bought and sold graded comic out there in the market. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book written by Jeff Loeb that came out in 2008 and would feature the first cover appearance of Red Hulk, maybe the first appearance of Red Hulk. I mean, I don't know how you guys wanted to find it. Very interesting to talk about, because Hulk #2 is actually the first in-story appearance of the character. This book right here only has Hulk on the cover, but it is still the one that the market generally goes after when they want to get their hands on a Red Hulk book. Now, as to why this book is trending recently, well, we've all heard the rumors that Red Hulk is possibly going to be making an appearance in the Captain America New World Order movie that is set to come out in 2024. They've already announced the fact that we're going to get Leader in that movie, and I think it kind of makes sense that we would get some kind of Red Hulk combination. A lot of people are speculating right now that Harrison Ford has been recast to play the William Hurt role of General Ross, and he is going to be one taking up the mantle of Red Hulk. So all of the Red Hulk books definitely, got super hot once again in the market. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. 9.9s, there's actually 3 on the census, but let's jump down to the 9.8s. 1,355 on the census. Fair market value is $300. 30-day moving, $318. So kind of, right in line to the fair market value. But you can see this is a book that has had a little bit of a lift back up due to the fact that we've had this kind of, speculation that Harrison Ford is going to be playing Red Hulk. I mean, previously this had been a book that was heavily speculated on and was on a decline, but we kind of got that kind of dead cap bounce or that little bit of a lift. And I think that, it'll be interesting to see where this book goes from here, if the excitement of the anticipation of Red Hulk can kind of keep this book afloat at that particular level. 9.6s have 1,000 on the census. Fair market value is around 150, so about half price of the 9.8. And then of course at the bottom, 2008 book, not going to stay slabbed at the low grade, but when you go into eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically you see them being sold around that, $40, $50, maybe $70 price point, depending on the deal and depending on the grade. Anyways, that is all for this video. Those were Go Collect's hottest trending comics of the week. Let me know what you guys think. Do you guys have any of these books? Drop me a like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the content, and I'll see you in the next one.